Daniel's weathered hands traced the grain of the oak beam, finding comfort in its familiar texture. At 73, he still woke before dawn in his sparse cabin, muscles aching, but spirit unbroken. The walls around him bore witness to decades of solitary craftsmanship, every joint cut by his hands alone, every nail driven by his hammer. Morning, Daniel called Mrs. Henderson from her garden as he passed. He nodded curtly, avoiding the warmth in her eyes. Him, but from a distance, the legendary carpenter who needed no one, who could raise a barn single-handedly while others struggled with teams. But in the quiet hours between dusk and sleep, Daniel's cabin felt vast and hollow. He'd sit in his chair, staring at the empty one across from him, the one he'd crafted for Martha 40 years ago, before she'd grown tired of competing with his tools for attention. "You love your work more than you could ever love me," she'd whispered the night she left, tears streaming down her face. He'd built his fortress of pride on the foundation of that heartbreak to disappointment. His father had taught him that weakness was asking for help, that a man stood on his own 2 feet or he wasn't a man at all. Daniel had internalized that lesson so completely that he'd forgotten how to lower his guard. The letter from the Forestry Service crinkled in his poquita. Commission for a cabin deep in whispering woods. 3 days, they'd said. Good money. As he packed his tools that evening, Daniel felt the familiar surge of anticipation. This would be his masterpiece, his final proof that he needed no one. He couldn't know that this project would tear down every wall he'd spent a lifetime building. The forest embraced Daniel with its ancient silence as he trudged deeper into whispering woods, his tool belt heavy against his hips. Snow crunched beneath his boots, each step taking him further from civilization and deeper into his element. Here, surrounded by towering pines and the whisper of wind through bare branches, he felt truly alive. Day 1 passed in a blur of measured cuts and careful planning. Daniel worked with the precision his experienced hands coaxing perfect joints from rough timber. As darkness fell, he sat by his small fire, sharing his meager dinner with the night sounds of the forest. The ache in his joints seemed insignificant compared to the satisfaction of progress made entirely through his own efforts. Day 2 brought the real test. The support beam's massive oak timbers that would bear the cabin's weight lading like sleeping giants. Daniel had lifted such beams before, but that was years ago when his back was straighter and his grips stronger. He positioned himself beneath the first beam, muscles trembling with anticipation and stubbornness. "Come on, old man," he muttered to himself, echoing his father's voice. "Show them what you're made of." The beam rose slowly. Daniel's face reddening with effort. His legs shook violently as he attempted to maneuver it into position. Suspended in that moment, man against wood, pride against physics. Then his left knee buckled, and the world collapsed. The beam crashed down as Daniel hit the snow-covered ground hard. Pain exploding through his spine like lightning. He lay there gasping, watching his breath form clouds in the frigid air. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel couldn't get up. The forest that had welcomed him now seemed vast and indifferent, and he was utterly, completely alone. Marcus had been gathering firewood when he heard the crash echo through the forest. The 2080-year-old teacher from Pine Ridge often walked to these woods for peace, but today something urgent pulled him toward the sound. He found Daniel sprawled beneath the massive beam, conscious but clearly in agony. "Sir, don't move," Marcus said, dropping his bundle and kneeling beside the older man. "I'm going to help you." "Don't need help," Daniel wheezed, his voice barely audible. Just need to catch my breath." Marcus studied the scene, the ambitious project, the scattered tools, the stubborn pride written across Daniel's weathered face. He recognized the type. His own grandfather had been the same way, dying alone rather than admit he needed assistance. "No, you don't need help," Marcus said gently, beginning to clear debris from around Daniel. "But I need to give it. My grandfather taught me that refusing help robs others of their chance to serve." Despite his pain, Daniel watched as this stranger built a fire with practiced efficiency, melted snow for water, and fashioned a makeshift pillow from his own jacket. There was something in the young man's movements, careful, respectful, never rushing, that reminded Daniel of himself at that age. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, accepting the warm cup Marcus offered. "Marcus, I teach at the elementary school in Pine Ridge. I know who you are, Mr. Carpenter. Everyone does." "Then you know I work alone," Marcus smiled, settling beside him. "I used to think the same thing. After my wife died 2 years ago, I was determined to handle everything myself. Nearly killed me with exhaustion and grief." He poked at the fire. "A neighbor finally told me, 'Marcus, sometimes strength isn't about carrying the load, it's about knowing when to share it.'" Daniel felt something crack inside his chest, and for the first time in decades, it wasn't from physical pain. By morning, Daniel could move with Marcus's help, though his back protested every step. The logical choice was to abandon the project, but something in the younger man's steady presence made Daniel reconsider. "I could help you finish," Marcus offered, studying the half-built cabin. "I'm not a carpenter, but I'm good with my hands, and I learn quickly." Daniel's instinct was to refuse, But as he looked at the challenging work ahead, he felt the weight of his limitations. You'd do that, even though you don't know me. My grandfather always said the best way to know someone is to work beside them. They fell into an easy rhythm. Daniel directed while Marcus lifted, their movements gradually, synchronizing like dancers learning a new routine. As they worked, they talked about Marcus's students, Daniel's decades of building, the loneliness that had defined both their recent years. "Why did you stop asking for help?" Marcus asked during their lunch break, sharing his sandwich with Daniel. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching steam rise from their shared coffee. "My father used to say that needing people made you weak. When my wife left, I thought it proved him right." He paused, his voice dropping. "Afraid of being disappointed that I've lived my whole life disappointed. And now." Daniel looked at the cabin taking shape around them, solid and beautiful. "Now I think maybe I was afraid of the wrong thing." That evening, as they shared a meal by the fire, Daniel found himself laughing for the first time in months. Marcus told stories about his students, their innocent wisdom and boundless energy. In return, Daniel shared tales from his years of building, the satisfaction of creating something lasting with his hands. The cabin was finished in 2 days, not 3. But more importantly, Daniel had built something else, a bridge back to the world of human connection. Spring arrived early in Pine Ridge, and with it came a transformation that surprised everyone. Daniel's workshop, once a fortress of solitude, began opening its doors to visitors. It started with Marcus stopping by after school, then a few curious neighbors, and eventually young people seeking to learn the old ways of building. "Mr. Daniel, can you show me how to make a dovetail joint?" asked Sarah, a 16-year-old whose eyes lit up when she worked with wood. Daniel guided her hands on the chisel, remembering how his own grandfather had taught him the same technique. "Feel the grain," he said softly. "The wood will tell you where it wants to be cut." The workshop hummed with activity now. Teenagers learned alongside retirees, sharing stories and techniques passed down through generations. Daniel had become what he'd never imagined: a teacher, a mentor, a cornerstone of community. Mrs. Henderson brought fresh bread every Tuesday, staying to chat about her garden and Daniel's students. "You seem different," she observed one afternoon. "Lighter somehow." Daniel smiled, his hands steady as he showed young Tommy how to properly hold a plane. "I finally learned the difference between being independent and being isolated," he said. "Independence means you can choose when to ask for help. Isolation means you forget that help exists." Marcus visited often, sometimes bringing his students to see the craftsmanship. The cabin in Whispering Woods had become a destination for school. Trips, a symbol of what could be accomplished when people worked together. On quiet evenings, Daniel would sit in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and laughter of his new community. The empty chair across from him was no longer empty. Different people filled it each day, bringing their questions, their stories, their companionship. He'd learned that strength wasn't about standing alone against the world. True strength was building bridges strong enough to support not just yourself, but everyone who needed to cross them. And in the end, that made all the difference.